Donald Trump shut the government down over what amounts to most likely a campaign promise that he was going to build the wall. He was going to build the wall. He was going to build the wall. That he was going to put up an unnecessary border wall to people who don't want Mexicans and other immigrants coming into the country. Donald Trump, in doing this, jumped the shark. Now, in declaring this national emergency, the House of Representatives, at this point, owned by the Democratic Party, of course, flipped out over this, but so did some Republicans. Meaning, there were also Republicans who didn't necessarily like Donald Trump using national emergency in order to get funding to build a wall that was entirely unnecessary, and that they themselves knew that it was unnecessary, meaning there was no national emergency at the border. This was purely fulfilling a campaign pledge. So Nancy Pelosi with the House of Representatives rebuked this. Now, by law, if the House of Representatives rebukes a national emergency declaration by the President of the United States, the House of Representatives, the Senate, has the vote on it. The Senate, at this point, owned by the Republican Party. And they did just that. They just voted on it, and they just voted to rebuke the President of the United States. Several Republicans crossed over the you could say the divide in order to back the Democrats in voting down the President's unnecessary declaration of emergency. That is not an emergency. Let's take a look at this, because I'm going to give you the update on this also, because yes, there's been an update that fast. Right, just the basics. The Senate delivered a high-profile rebuke of President Donald Trump over his signature agenda legislation issued Thursday when 12 Republicans joined Democrats to overturn the president's national emergency border declaration. The vote was 59-41, an overwhelming vote against the president's executive action. Yes, it was. The question becomes, what happens next? What happens next is Donald Trump vetoes this, because that is exactly what Donald Trump did. Donald Trump vetoed this within, I think within a day or so of them doing this. The question becomes, does the Senate have enough votes to overturn the president's veto? That is unknown. It is unclear on whether or not the Senate has that. The idea will be no, since this vote total wasn't enough to overturn the veto. So the assumption would be, well, no. If you didn't have enough to overturn it here, why would you have enough to overturn it in the next vote? Nevertheless, this is coming up for a revote. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the end of March. Let's see. All right, so right here. I'm going to show you the president's veto, meaning I'm going to put it at the bottom of the video. But March 26th. All right. So the House of Representatives will vote to override this veto on March 26th, in which case the Senate, I would imagine, would have to also take this measure up to determine whether or not it will be enough to overturn the veto. Skeptical on whether or not it's enough to overturn the veto, but when there's President Bernie Sanders in office, and President Bernie Sanders is going to get out in front of the public and say, look, climate change is a national emergency. The fact we have people sleeping on the streets is a national emergency. We're going to marshal all the funds necessary under this declaration of Americans being put into really horrendous situations or of oncoming disaster. And we're going to marshal the forces to overturn or to go around and intransigent Congress. Mike Lee, a Republican, kind of made this point pretty clearly, actually. In fact, I wonder, do I have... No, I don't have this thing. But I have this comment. Declaring a national emergency to access different funds set a dangerous new precedent. GOP Senator Rob Portman, it wasn't Mike Lee, it was Portman. Rob Portman on Ohio warned in his remarks in the Senate floor ahead of the vote. It opens the door for future presidents to implement just about any policy they want. Think about it. Congress is supposed to hold the purse strings, and the president has just called a national emergency for something that's not a national emergency to go around the fact that the Constitution has enshrined Congress with the purse strings. Yeah, Portman is right. That's somewhat problematic. The reason I said Mike Lee is because I was watching the speech from Mike Lee before I started this video. And Mike Lee essentially made that argument too, saying this is not a rebuke of Donald Trump, this is not a rebuke of his administration, etc., etc., etc. My issue here is that you're going around power that is enshrined within Congress. And that opens the door for pretty much anybody to do pretty much anything. So I will end this here. There's not much on this. This was somewhat just a news update. And I'll see you guys in a few. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free, of course, to share, like, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And